the complexities of do not track. The term do not track is used generically to describe any mechanism whereby an Internet user's web activities are not tracked or collected. Do not track mechanisms come in a variety of forms. Some focus on data collection, others on blocking targeted advertising. For decades, individual advertisers and some advertising networks allowed consumers to opt out of receiving targeted advertisements through the use of web cookies, which consumers could obtain from the advertiser. This was less than optimal, however, because the consumer had to seek out each individual advertiser to obtain an appropriate cookie. The term do not track is currently used more specifically to refer to an HTTP header field that requests a website or app to disable either its tracking or cross-site tracking of an Internet user's activities. The use of an Internet header thus allows a single do not track signal to be maintained on a browser and does not require multiple individual cookies. The history of do not track is instructive. In 2007, several consumer advocacy groups asked the FTC to create a do not track list for online advertising, modeled after the popular do not call telephone list. Nothing came of the request until mid-2010 when the FTC announced it was formally exploring a do not track list. In late 2010, the concept of using an HTTP header instead of cookies or a list to signal an Internet user's desires not to be tracked gained widespread acceptance among the privacy community. In 2011, Mozilla became the first browser to provide a do not track header option on its Firefox browser. Microsoft's Internet Explorer, Apple's Safari, and Google's Chrome browsers soon followed. In February of 2012, the FTC, the White House, and the Digital Advertising Alliance, an association of the major online advertising networks, jointly announced support for the concept of a browser-based HTTP do not track header. The World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C as it is known, is an international Internet standard-setting group which brought together all interested stakeholders in an effort to formulate an agreed-upon international standard for a header-based do-not-track system. The work of the W3C, despite many meetings of the participants over the past 2 years, has unfortunately bogged down, and privacy advocates and the advertising industry have recently engaged in a war of words, claiming each respective group is not bargaining in good faith and is trying to scuttle the process. Microsoft angered the advertising industry in late 2012 when it announced that Internet Explorer 10 would actuate a do not track header by default. This departed from the other browsers, which require a user to affirmatively actuate the do not track header. Advertisers quickly announced they would ignore the Internet Explorer do not track signal because it makes the consumer's choice for them. The W3C also criticized Microsoft's decision. In the meantime, the Digital Advertising Alliance developed a do not track system of its own, which allows a user to affirmatively opt out of receiving targeted advertising by logging onto a website and clicking on an icon. The icon links to a brief video about the value of interest-based advertising and then displays another link where the user may actually opt out of receiving interest-based ads from some or all DAA members. The user's Internet activity is still tracked, but no ads are received based on the browsing history. The DAA notes that its Your Ad Choices campaign has had more than 25 million visits and more than 1 million persons have opted out of targeted advertising. Let's watch a brief video about the Your Ad Choices campaign.
Let's assume you see the Ad Choices icon, and you know It tells you when information about your interests is being gathered or used to improve the ads you see. Now what? For starters, let's be clear about two things. Are you sitting down? Good. Here goes. 1. Advertising pays for almost everything on the internet. Your free email box. Thanks, advertising. Your customized news sites. Ditto. Photo sharing site. Thanks again. 2. And perhaps more shocking, is that interest-based advertising shows you ads that you might actually want to see. A web banner with an offer for that thing you want? Good to know, ad choices. So, if you like the good and free services on the internet and ads that are more relevant to you, then here are some things you can do. A. Sit back and get promos and offers that make your life better. B. Find an obscure record in the Guinness Book to try to topple. C. Alphabetize your clothes. D. Invent teleportation finally, for crying out loud. E. Do absolutely, positively anything you want to do within the reasonable constraints of your conscience, the laws of both the land and physics, and common sense. But what if you don't want any part of the customized online advertising experience? Well, we call it ad choices for a reason. The icon makes it easy to find out about the companies that are bringing you interest-based ads and puts you in control. So, if you're not interested in interest-based advertising, you can opt out at any time. How? Go to the control page of youradchoices.com and check out your choices. Whether you want to keep getting interest-based ads or you don't, hey, it's your ad choices.
So, where do things stand now? The major browsers all have a Do Not Track header, but the signals are being ignored by the majority of websites and advertisers. The advertising industry has formulated its own program as an alternative to the Microsoft default header. And the W3C is at least a year away from its recommendation. In other words, things are a mess and the issue is far from being resolved. Recently, there has been a renewed call for Congress to mandate a Do Not Track system. And there is a looming battle royal between the advertising industry, which wants self-regulation, and privacy advocates who say self-regulation is simply not working. So, if all the interested parties conceptually agree that an HTTP header-based Do Not Track system makes sense, what has prevented the parties from reaching agreement? Well, there are 4 primary areas of fierce disagreement between the parties. First is the disagreement over what constitutes tracking. Is tracking limited to third-party tracking of data over multi-sites, or does tracking include first-party gathering of information? Many large web platforms like Google and Facebook gather information from their billions of users who elect to use their services. On the other hand, smaller advertisers need to have cross-site tracking to reach potential customers. Secondly, the parties disagree over whether consumers should have the power to prohibit both the use and collection of data. Advertisers want to collect information from users even if they opt out of targeted advertising in the event a consumer changes his or her mind in the future. The third area of dispute, and perhaps the most hotly contested, is whether consumers who do not want to be tracked should be required to affirmatively opt out of tracking. Privacy advocates argue that the default should be Do Not Track, and cite numerous public opinion polls indicating people overwhelmingly are concerned about the tracking of their internet activity. Advertisers counter that the public does not understand the benefits of tracking and want users to take affirmative action to opt out only after being fully informed about the implications of opting out. And finally, there is considerable disagreement on what exceptions to no tracking should be recognized. For example, should tracking be allowed for research purposes? for the functionality of a website or for the purposes of identifying fraud? Should there be an exception for law enforcement purposes or for internal use by first-party websites? So what exactly is at stake in this battle? If we are unable to control the collection and use of information about our Internet activities, will we, as the privacy advocates argue, unavoidably lose a significant component of our privacy as we become increasingly dependent on the Internet in our everyday life? Or will the Internet, as the advertising industry argues, cease to be a source of free access to information, product, and services and become a tool only for the financially well-off? In our next lecture, we look at the physical location which historically has enjoyed the greatest level of privacy, the home.